the biggest change that we've seen as a business, and I think where the questions are going to come from for us, are the changes to the IHT treatment of pensions. That was if there was a topic I'd pick to focus on in this conversation from our side of the table, and when I come into any talk, presentation, podcast, whatever it is, I always sit and think to myself, what are my clients going to ask me? What after this budget? It's understanding the change. But the next and more important bit, I think, for people is understanding, if you to take value from these conversations, it's practically what does it mean for people and what can they do. So, the change that we've seen currently, pensions are exempt from inheritance tax. So, if we just used in all these scenarios, we use the assumption that somebody's just got £1 million house, so they've already used all of their IHT free exemptions for their estate, and so whatever we're looking at now is above that. So, currently, or up until this budget, if you had £1 million house and then a £1 million in your pension, you'd have paid no inheritance tax. And in theory, after this budget, if you've got £1 million house and £1 million in your pension, you'll pay £400,000 in inheritance tax.
That's a huge amount of money. Something just wipe off. 40% of your.
And in that situation, if you've got a £2 million estate, only £1 million of that is liquid, because £1 million of it is your house, which if you're down south is very understandable. You can't really raise an income from that. So that's £1 million maybe to give a husband and wife everything they need in retirement, which in theory is probably conservatively a £40,000 a year income. Now, £40,000 a year, when the national minimum wage is going to be the equivalent of probably getting on for £25,000 a year, £40,000 a year isn't a huge amount of money. And obviously the risk of that being taxed on death. Now, some of the details that were there, if you leave your pension to a married spouse, then there won't be any inheritance tax, so much like other assets at the moment. So that's good, that's sensible. It obviously brings in the very romantic question that if you're not married, it is genuinely worth considering getting married for tax purposes. And there's a lot of reasons, inheritance tax plan as a general rule, one of the top things at the list is being married. They don't recognise a common law couple. And that would be the same for pensions, it stands at the moment. And we assume that would extend to, civil partnerships as well. But it won't extend to unmarried couples. So that's one point to take away. So really kind of looking at second death, the rules as you currently stand at the moment, and this is where for me, there needs to be some clarity. So some key things, a consultation started immediately. It's going to run until January 2025 to look at the proposed changes. And I think there's going to be one point that comes out ahead of absolutely everything else. And that's at the moment, if you die post age 75, so we use that same scenario again, £1 million pension, your pension becomes subject to income tax post 75 on death. So if I've got £1 million pension, I leave it to my son, he would effectively pay probably the best part of £450,000 tax if he took it as a lump sum. So actually death post 75 potentially isn't that much of a substantial change, as long as we see these double taxation rules come in, which basically means that if you do die post 75, that if you've paid 40% inheritance tax on your pot, so in this scenario £400,000, that on the remainder you're not then subject to income tax as well, because theoretically you could end up in a situation where you're paying 85% tax, and actually the clarity wasn't there in that budget. I've seen two different articles with two different outcomes. I think the government are well aware, they've had immediate feedback on it, and I assume, I can't see in any world that they won't come out and say, if you pay IHT, you don't then pay income tax. And I think that the system, how they want that to be collected, is that your pension provider will deduct IHT off the pot. So you die at 76 years old, £1 million pension, your pension provider takes £400,000, and they send your beneficiary £600,000. Obviously, they'll have to, there's a bit of work there to liaise, is it going to a spouse or not? But as long as those rules come into play, then in theory, the overall tax position for post 75 isn't as horrific as it first seems. Under 75, though, would be, because currently, if you die under 75, it's both income tax free and inheritance tax free, and all that would happen is, whilst it would remain income tax free, it would be subject to inheritance tax. So £1 million pension, you die at 74 years old, you lose £400,000 in tax. Say you're leaving it to a son or a daughter or something like that. And actually, there's very little that can be done in that situation to mitigate the impact of that tax. Now, none of this is due to come in until 2027. The consultation will take place.
I mean, several months before we actually get a result from that as well.
There's some bits to iron out. I think, the next natural thing that people will be asking is, how does it change planning? What can you do? Because it is substantial. This is the biggest change we've seen for years. I think the one thing that jumped out at me, and I had a long drive back yesterday in the car kind of mulling this over, and the first thing that came out to me was, if you're post 75 and you've not taken tax-free cash from your pension, actually, if you have got an estate that's subject to inheritance tax, the consideration to draw your tax-free lump sum and gift it and hope that you survive the 7 years, you're facing a scenario there that if you don't take it and gift it, you're going to pay inheritance tax. Whereas if you take it and gift it, you might not, as long as you survive 7 years. So if you've got £1 million pension, that's the equivalent of being able to, get £250,000 of that million outside the estate. So, which is a total U-turn on where we've been with planning. Up until this point, it's been don't touch your pension, it's sacrosanct, leave it till the end, last asset, never touch it if you've got an inheritance taxable estate. So I think that's one outcome we expect to see, but again, I won't be rushing to do this with any of my clients until, it's always case by case, but certainly until the consultation has ended. And then, but I still think, practically speaking, the next question people I think are going to ask is, are pensions still worth it? And my view on this is that we've got property, ISAs, and then we've got pensions, and they've been right up here in tax efficiency. They've been leagues ahead of anything else. They're so tax advantaged, and actually all we've done is just take a bit of the shine off. And then you're still going to have pensions, you're still going to have property, ISAs, cash, and pensions still going to be ahead. If you're a business owner, if you're a high rate taxpayer, additional rate taxpayer, they're still going to carry all of the income tax savings, tax-free growth, capital gains tax-free growth, the ability to take corporation tax deductible contributions, all of those bits are still there, and 25% tax-free cash. We've just lost inheritance. So in terms of it being an inheritance tax planning vehicle, I think it's going to take the shine off, but actually, I still think as a planning vehicle, whilst people are going to be miffed, so to speak, because we never like to lose anything, it is still going to be the best option.
It's still going to be there. I mean, again, also touching on ISAs as well, there's no change to that. You've still got the 20,000.
Still good limits, other than the British ISA, which never even got off the ground. That's a small nod to the British ISA that basically has been totally scrapped because
completely mothballed.
It goes against, the reason they scrapped it though, and it does make sense, is it goes against the idea of ISA simplification, bringing in another allowance that's specifically for one thing, when we're trying to, everything that's been done over the last couple of years has been to simplify ISAs. These rules about not being able to have more than one ISA in a tax year, and now it's very flexible. You can open as many as you want as long as you don't exceed the £20,000. We've obviously got normal adult ISAs, junior ISAs, and then we've got lifetime ISAs. I think that is enough ISAs. We don't need an Argos catalogue of ISAs.
We're sitting there 20 minutes thinking, which ISAs works well for me, and it's.
So that is off the cards. It won't. Consultation. Some of the big players came out and just said they thought it was basically a pointless endeavour. And I probably have to say I thought the same thing. And in reality, if you look at where people have invested, predominantly, or where asset allocation tends to be now, it is more worldwide. It is more global. So forcing people to invest into the UK, which has been. In terms of fund manager and asset allocation, the UK has been probably a smaller proportion. I at the same point whenever I have a conversation with a new client, that when you're looking at investing, you talk about risk, and you're looking at global equity markets. You've got Apple, which is larger than the entire UK economy. So if you add up all the companies, all the value that's out there, we are smaller. The whole UK economy is smaller than Apple. So it is obviously logical now to have, you do see exposures overseas over exposure to the UK. So I don't think it really had any legs, to be honest.
No, it was all more of a flash in the pan, really, wasn't it? I think again, it
sounded good.
It
sounded brilliant, but it didn't really do that.
But it just fell flat on its face again, unfortunately. So it's just we again, it just seems to be that we're in a position at the moment, obviously with this budget, where again I know before the budget harping on, for want of a better term, about the black hole in the budget. There's not really a black hole. There is a difference between how much you're collecting and how much you're spending. And again, obviously, they had the idea that they want to spend X number of billions. They've got to get X number of billions back in. And the very much the argument of, well, it's left in a much worse state than we thought it was. Well, again, you've had access to the same sort of figures that the previous government had as well. So it's at times you start to feel like that they are. Yes, we've got a long way. We've got an economy to rebuild and to sort of come out of COVID and out of Brexit as well. And there are ways and means of trying to sort of do that without effectively stifling growth as well. And I think, again, I know with the IHT for pensions coming in, it will bring in quite a few £1 billion to the exchequer.
It's relatively small, though, isn't it?
It's very
when you talk headlines, the headline was £40 billion of tax needed to be raised. Now, 25 million of that is going to be NIs. The lion's share of this whole budget is NI, and actually the other taxes, I think it's sort of tinkering. And again, my only political statement, I'll make in this is that they've painted themselves into a corner, and I think anyone you speak to has the same opinion, because they said they wouldn't raise taxes on the working man, and that's this budget is it's I think people in our position working with companies would say that this will raise taxes for the working man, because if companies pay more NI, that will mean that they'll probably give lower pay rises to staff, or they may consider letting somebody go. One way or another, they'll have to balance the books, and the person who suffers at the end of it is the employee. So I'm not sure that statement works, but the headline was, we're not going to raise employee NI, and we're not going to raise VAT and income tax. And the problem is they're your biggest tax generators. So then we're having to look at more obscure legislation, which it hits pockets of society. And obviously, the point that I wanted to raise